think it might be time to start. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa. Welcome to this special Canterbury Socialist Society event titled Surprise, It's Women's Day again. As ever, thank you to Space Academy for hosting us, and thank you all for attending. The Canterbury Socialist Society presents regular educational and social events that promote working class history, issues and politics, and we really appreciate those people and places that support us along the way. If you'd like to learn more about our efforts, please sign up to our mailing list, and please also consider joining the Canterbury Socialist Society. We have some literature, some of it is here, wave at the front, some of it is by the door, or you're welcome to chat with one of our executive members, and I'm going to ask them to just do a little wave. There are at least three, four of them around. Cool. So I'd just like to take a couple of moments to highlight some of our current and forthcoming projects. So I'm delighted to announce the return of the Canterbury Socialist Society radio show / podcast, The End of History, which airs monthly on the community access radio station Plains FM. The show focuses on issues of class struggle, contemporary unionism, economics, and current affairs in order to promote working class history and socialist ideas. The Canterbury Socialist Society thanks former host Mark Ballstone for his time and work as host and wishes him all the best as he completes his studies in nursing. The Canterbury Socialist Society also welcomes the show's new host, Sionainn Byrnes. That's actually me. Anyway, whatever. This is what happens when you get to speak on behalf of the Canterbury Socialist Society. Anyway, the first episode of The End of History for 2022 features the Ōtautahi Christchurch activist and author and Canterbury Socialist Society member, Byron Clark, on the topic of anti-mandate protests and their connections to the far right. And you can access that first episode via the Plains FM website, or tune in to 96.9 Plains FM at 9 p.m. on the fourth Monday of each month. If you'd like to contribute anything to the show, please talk to me, or you can email canterburysocialistsociety@gmail.com. Our executive member of the Canterbury Socialist Society, Martin Crick, is also working on a regular members newsletter, which will feature short articles, reviews, union and other relevant news, and so on. And so Martin is asking for contributions from members across the New Zealand Federation of Socialist Societies. And again, if you have something that you'd like to contribute to that, email canterburysocialistsociety@gmail.com. And literally, I don't want to say we'll take anything, but we will take anything. So, just send it through. So now to the main event. Yesterday was International Women's Day, and many of you will know that International Women's Day originates in socialist feminism. In February 1909, the Socialist Party of America held its first National Women's Day at the suggestion of the activist and educator Theresa Melchior. In August 1910, Clara Zetkin and other German socialist feminists proposed the establishment of an annual Women's Day at the International Socialist Women's Conference held ahead of the general meeting of the Second Internationale. The following year, over 1 million people in Austria, Denmark, Germany and Switzerland celebrated the first International Women's Day. Russia celebrated International Women's Day for the first time in February 1913, and on March the 8th, 1917, February the 23rd, by the Julian calendar, women textile workers in Petrograd began a demonstration that is now considered to have helped start the February Revolution and so the Russian Revolution. Following the October Revolution, Alexandra Kollontai, about whom you'll hear more shortly, I promise, and Vladimir Lenin declared International Women's Day an official holiday in the Soviet Union. Until the late 1960s, International Women's Day was predominantly celebrated by communist countries or in communist countries. In the late 1960s, it was taken up by second-wave feminists in the West and became a day on which to call for women's equal pay, equal economic opportunity, equal legal rights, reproductive rights, subsidised childcare, and the prevention of violence against women. The United Nations celebrated International Women's Day for the first time in 1975, and other corporations followed suit. Thus began the flurry of, quote, hashtags and vacuous corporate slogans that now flood International Women's Day, as Ellie Mayo Hagen puts it. I'm not really concerned to detail the historical evolution of International Women's Day much further. Suffice it to say for now that each year the United Nations ascribes a theme to International Women's Day, this year's being Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, as if it were that simple. The International Women's Day website has decided to go with its own suitably corporate hashtag Break the Bias. The Canterbury Socialist Society has gone for something entirely different. It's actually not that different, but it's better. So let me be clear. I don't wish to throw shade on the idea of an International Women's Day panel. The Canterbury Socialist Society presented an excellent panel last year, and I want to thank Evelyn Fink for reminding me that a recording of that event featuring Edith Van Zelderen, Isla Martin and Jen Shields exists. And I promise it will be available via the New Zealand Federation of Socialist Societies website later this week. The Wellington Socialist Society is presenting what promises to be a fantastic, International Women's Day panel at the Vogelmorn Bowling Club this Sunday. And to be fair, tonight's event is a panel of sorts. It's just that as International Women's Day has become synonymous with so many hashtags and vacuous corporate slogans, so too has it become synonymous with the panel in which diverse women debate the question of whether feminism still matters. The irony is that the diverse women on these panels don't actually matter as long as they reach the same conclusion every time. Feminism matters somewhat, and now what? This year, I wanted to give some of the women of the Canterbury Socialist Society an opportunity to impress themselves a little bit more on the content of our event. And so I asked Kezia, Angela and Hayley, and others who sadly couldn't be here tonight, to select a historical figure, ideally a woman or queer person, that they find interesting, and to tell us about that person in terms of issues of gender, sex and sexuality, socialism, and whatever else they actually find interesting. Having seen some of the results, I can only say that I'm proud, but not surprised, that when given the opportunity, or when the opportunity is forced upon them, women who might feel anxious and unprepared and unqualified can come up with content that is engaging, varied, critical, and so worth listening to. It's my absolute pleasure to present this International Women's Day surprise, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Kezia to the floor. One sec. I'm going to give you the opportunity to give her a round of applause, okay? So Kezia is in her 5th and final year of study at the University of Canterbury, completing a Bachelor of Criminal Justice and a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in History and Russian. This is Kezia on the Russian revolutionary and politician Alexandra Kolontai. Please give Kezia a round of applause.
I feel like I need to preface this by saying that I do not have much public speaking experience, so if we could all pretend we can't hear my voice shaking, that would be amazing. So I will be talking, as Sionainn said, about a figure oft forgotten nowadays, yet prominent if controversial in her own time, Alexandra Kolontai. Kolontai was a Marxist feminist and Lenin's contemporary. She was a Menshevik, then she was a Bolshevik, Then she became the first woman in history to become a member of government as Commissar for Social Welfare, a position she held only briefly before being forced to resign due to her opposition to the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, for which Lenin claimed she deserved to be shot. For those who don't know, the Brest-Litovsk Treaty was the result of peace negotiations between the newly formed Bolshevik government and the Central Powers to negotiate Russia's exit from World War I. Kollontai narrowly avoided expulsion from the party, but was still ostracized for her opposition and her general criticisms of the bureaucratization of the party. She was also scorned by many of her comrades for her feminist ideals. In 1922, she was effectively exiled from the Soviet Union, and in 1930, Stalin further erased her contributions by shutting down the Zhenotdel, the Department for Women's Affairs, which Kollontai had co-founded. Through the Zhenotdel, Kollontai pursued pretty significant changes, including socialized maternity and childcare. There were some pretty inspiring ideas floating around at this time, but unfortunately many of these ideas were never properly implemented, not least because of the unchanged attitudes of the men of the party who were not yet fully convinced on the idea of women's liberation. I don't want to focus too much on her political career though. I want to talk about the interesting stuff, her writings. Kollontai wrote prolifically on issues that she not only deemed important, but they were largely being ignored by her comrades. In particular, she wrote extensively on the abolition of the traditional family structure, which she viewed to hold women in a place of servitude and conjugal slavery, and its replacement with free, equal relationships born out of camaraderie. Not only was traditional marriage understood by Kollontai to be rooted in patriarchy, but she believed it impoverished the soul and damaged the psyche, and in that way harmed everyone involved. Along that sort of line of thinking, she also believed that child raising was the responsibility of the collective, and that a proper socialist mother would love all children equally and treat them all as her own. In making child raising a collective responsibility, Kollontai aimed to destroy the double burden of women, who were expected to go to work in the factory or wherever else, and then come home and do the domestic work as well. One of the few things that Kollontai and Lenin agreed on was that communism ought to liberate women from housework, which I think is a fantastic idea. I think we should stick with that. Kollontai's writings focused quite heavily on the lack of financial and moral support that proletariat women had, which left them unprotected and restricted. For that reason and more, Kollontai criticised the feminists and suffragettes of her time for seeking equality with men within the capitalist framework and ignoring the harm that working class women would continue to endure. Despite her contributions to feminist thought, modern-day feminists like myself would find much to disagree with in her writings. For example, Kollontai viewed abortion as a bourgeois excess and was firm in her belief that under communism, abortions would only take place if the pregnant person's life was in danger, or, here's the real kicker, for the purposes of eugenics, to prevent people with so-called undesirable medical conditions from reproducing. Kollontai also held quite strict views on pregnancy and childbirth being the duty of women, and lamented the women of her time who did not understand that this was their social obligation, going as far as to think that legislation would be needed to regulate reproduction according to the economic needs of the collective. Now you might be wondering why I chose to talk about Kollontai given my disagreements with her, and they're not insignificant disagreements. And it's not to make some contrived point about women being complex beings. We're all grown-ups here. I'm sure we all understand already that women are not homogeneous one-dimensional creatures that operate within neat binaries of good and bad. The reason I picked her is because I genuinely dislike the idolization of any sort of public figure, and I wanted to use this opportunity to make an argument against this. That's not to say that I don't think we should acknowledge the actions of individuals who do good things, but I do firmly believe that putting these people who do great things on pedestals can harm our movements. I think one of the great faults of neoliberal feminism is that people put their hopes in individuals who often turn out to have done some not great things, and then they don't know how to recover from this damaged image and really damaged morale. Socialism is a collective movement. Feminism at its best is a collective movement. So when we're talking about individuals within these movements, I think that we should be careful not to overemphasize their deeds, but to keep in mind that these support systems and communities enabled these individuals' actions. And we can look at Kollontai case, where she came from a well-educated background, and she was in a position of privilege where she was able to leave her child to be raised by someone else while she travelled the world and had affairs and wrote her contributions to feminist thought, which we get to discuss today. To me, it's the difference between the personality cult of Lenin, which Lenin himself would have hated, and the Stakhanovite movement, which was primarily about the everyday working class people. So that's the message I want to end with, as we learn about these inspirational women who I'm sure did great things. No one should be elevated above anyone else, because we can achieve even greater things as a collective. So it is in that spirit which I will end my little speech with an appropriate quote from Kollontai. Women's Day is a day of international solidarity and a day for reviewing the strength and organisation of proletarian women. It was the working women of St. Petersburg who began this revolution. Happy Women's Day.
So good. Thank you, Kezia. So good. So we're so lucky to have Angela next. If you'd like to just pass that mic on, Kezia, that'd be great. Oh, you've got your own. Okay, cool. So Angela is a scientist and a proud union member. She has a passion for laughter and for building camaraderie through ball sports. And I've been privileged enough to play backyard cricket. Backyard cricket with Angela. Angela has selected the American unionist and physical educator, Olga Meda. Please give Angela a round of applause.
Hey, I'm Angela. I have a passion for backdoor cricket. I've chosen Olga Meda as a woman who I'd like to speak about for this Women's Day event. I've chosen Olga because I too feel very strongly about building strong and inclusive unions which support all genders, races and abilities. Olga's efforts and successes within the labour union movement lay directly with her passion for team sport as an inclusionary way to strengthen workers' relationships with each other, which leads to greater solidarity and power within the movement. So Olga Meda was a labour unionist, a feminist, softball warrior, and most importantly, a menace. As she worked in factories to earn her way through college, she became aware of sex discrimination in employment. Olga was the first woman on the International Executive Board of the labour union United Auto Workers, and one of the founders of the first president of the Coalition of Labour Union Women, which formed due to unhappiness among female union members with their lack of power within the unions. Meda, who would become one of the most important leaders of the UAW, was the long-time director of the UAW recreation programs from the late 1940s into the 70s, and she affixed particular focus on labour union sports. Her first assignment being the elimination of racial bias in organised bowling. As a result of her actions, the American Bowling Congress and the Women's International Bowling Congress dropped their whites-only membership policies in 1952. Olga Meda came of age in the aftermath of the Great Depression. The labour movement was on the rise and seeking to harness recreation, especially sports leagues, as a form of union building. Before the Depression, early US corporations used that same practice to build company cohesion, but abandoned it during the Depression era. In the late 1930s, throughout the 1950s, leftist organisers responded to worker demand, where corporations wouldn't, by providing access to cheap recreational programs. As Labour won more leisure time and shorter hours with no corresponding reduced pay, organisers reasoned that bosses would fill those hours themselves unless the union could seize the opportunity and provide recreational activity. Workers wanted to play baseball, softball, bowling and basketball, so labour unions like the UAW developed teams and leagues. These sports became so popular that the UAW local newspapers even included a sports section. Maida played softball for a number of corporate teams in the auto industry, noting that companies would employ her because of her skills on the diamond, not those on the assembly line. She often had nightmares about how bad she was at her job, and same all the time. It's fucking terrifying. She would later remark that she learned about the need for a union there. There was no union in the plant then, and the fact that they would hire me when other workers were laid off just because I could play softball was incredible. It was my first indication that a union was badly needed. As a noted troublemaker, she didn't take long before becoming involved in labour organising, refusing to be solely used for the company's softball glories. For Maida, it was much more comfortable for her to play on squads put together by her fellow workers instead of management. Maida would devote herself to building labour sports in the UAW as part of a larger anti-racist, anti-fascist working class culture being fostered by labour organisers. Of her experience in organising labour sports in the 1930s, Maida noted that few people had money to go to professional baseball games, so both men and women made their own teams and own leagues using union organised sports to do so. Union organisers too gladly embraced this and put money towards labour sports leagues, since it helped build camaraderie of both players and supporters. Before the UAW was organised, management used to try to kid the workers they were doing something for them by having semi-pros represent the plant in sports. This was good advertising for the plant, but didn't mean much for the workers, Maida explained in an interview with a union newspaper. When the union came into being, it soon found that the pros weren't very popular and cost a lot of money. So now we are out for recreation in which the majority of our people can join and have fun. Olga Maida's educational attainment and physical prowess helped her build a career in union sports that ultimately worked to bring scientific, physical education and recreation to thousands of auto workers. From her early life as a star player through her work in labour sports leadership and advocating for working class women, Maida never forgot the power of both sport and unions to transform the lives of working people, women in particular, through athletics and a scientific approach to physical education. She remained an advocate for women, aware that women only worked 2 or 3 days a week in the industry and were often the last hired and the first fired. In 1996, Maida died of a heart attack at the age of 80. Maida, forever the troublemaker, she had been planning on being arrested in her wheelchair while supporting striking Detroit newspapers workers in that year.
Thank you, Angela. I'm just going to give myself this opportunity to top up my beer, so if anyone else would like that opportunity, I don't think it's a weird thing to do, is it? That actually wasn't me. That was Hayley. Would you like to top up, Angela? Well, you can do it yourself. Oh, it's a great time up here. Thank you, Angela. That was incredible. So we're really lucky to have Hayley up next. Hayley currently has a bureaucracy-adjacent office job. She has previously been a long-term student, a musician, and has worked in retail in Christchurch, Wellington, Melbourne, and New York. This is Hayley on the English activist and author Jack Monroe. Please give Hayley a round of applause.
So I think I missed the memo on his historic person, because this person is still alive and younger than me. And
history is now.
What I'm talking about happened a few weeks ago, so yeah. The person I'm introducing this evening is Jack Monroe. In her early 20s, she was an unemployed single mother, having had to leave her job as it wasn't possible to arrange shifts around childcare. She started a blog in February 2012 about her experience, and from December that year has posted fully costed, affordable recipes. These recipes have been compiled into 7 books. I think it's 6 and a 7th about to be released soon. I chose to speak about Jack today because of what she achieved earlier this year. In mid-January, it was announced that the Consumer Price Index in the UK had risen to 5.4% in December 2021. This is calculated by tracking price changes of 700 pre-specified goods and includes a leg of lamb and champagne. In response to hearing this on the news, Jack, in a flurry of tweets, itemised the goods so many people rely on, the cheapest basics and low-cost alternatives, and the increase in prices she had meticulously tracked over a decade for her own writing and out of her ongoing budgetary necessities. This told a very different story to the 5.4 increase on top-shelf items. The most basic pasta available had a 141% price increase, the cheapest rice a 344% price increase, peanut butter a 142% price increase. I think there is a handout that's got some of her tweets that has this in writing that I think wound up the front here. It's very small, but if you've got good eyesight, grab one and you can read some of this thread. On top of this, supermarkets were rapidly discontinuing value lines. In Jack's local supermarket, going from stocking over 400 products to 90, with products in the value range continuing to disappear from the shelves. This is all in stark contrast to upmarket ready meals and dine-in for two packs, remaining the exact same price over the same period. Within a couple of days, her thread had been read by over 15 million people, and major media outlets were challenging the inflation figure that previously reported without critique. The officially reported inflation rate of 5.4% was already a 30-year high, and yet it was clear that actual increases in costs were disproportionately burdening those with the least. In response, Jack created the Vimes Boots Price Index, named for Terry Pratchett's Vimes Boots theory of economics. This is also on the handout that is floating around, so you can read it in Pratchett's own words, but in essence it explains that those who can spend more on quality ultimately spend less over time as better quality goods last longer. This was picked up quickly, and Jack appeared in numerous news programs and other media in the UK and had articles published in the Observer and Sunday People. Organisations and individuals have rallied around the idea of this index, and Jack has crowdsourced data to supplement her own record keeping to generate it. It's not ready yet, but within 2 days of her viral thread, one supermarket chain had committed to capping their £1 products to £1 for this year. Within a week, two highly respected consumer affairs media outlets announced they would do their own shopping basket tracker of basic goods to document price changes and hold retailers to account. And the UK Office for National Statistics, that's the organisation that did the Consumer Price Index in the first place, announced they were changing the way they collect and report on the cost of food prices and inflation, taking into consideration a wider range of income levels and household circumstances. About 10 days after the thread, two major supermarket chains requested meetings with Jack, resulting in promises to stock their full budget ranges in all their supermarkets. This took effect rapidly, and around the same time, people contributing to the crowdsourced data for the index were reporting that value range items that hadn't been stocked in-store or online for some time were reappearing. Jack avoided grocery shopping for 3.5 weeks following her viral thread. When she finally had to return to her local supermarket in mid-February, she was greeted with prices on basic goods back to where they'd been a year ago, some that were even lower, and products that hadn't been stocked had returned to the shelves. There's a little excerpt from this thread as well, again on the handout floating around. As I read through the mid-February thread, I teared up. The thought of the impact that those changes will have on millions of people is staggering, coming from one well-placed, self-described lefty with the literal receipts and media connections to make an immense change in record time. Recent record inflation and gouging food prices are, of course, not unique to the UK. There's been more and more reports of it here. I think it was on the news last night included. And seeing the difference Jack made filled me with optimism that is, I think, rare on the left, that if there happens to be some organisation or individual here in New Zealand paying the same kind of meticulous long-term attention to these things, there may be a hope of holding food retailers to account.
Thank you, Hayley. So I mentioned in the Facebook description for this event that I hope to bring you 5 real-life women, and you'll notice that there are only 4 of us. So I'm afraid to say that in order that we might fill our hour, and because I don't expect others to do anything I wouldn't do, I've got one last woman for you. I've selected the Northern Irish activist and politician Josephine Bernadette Machilisky, nee Devlin, or as I like to call her, bitch slapping Bernadette Devlin. Okay. So Bernadette Devlin was born in Cookstown, County Tyrone, some 70 kilometres northwest of Belfast. She was born to Catholic parents, and she was the 3rd eldest of 6 children. Bernadette's father, John James Devlin, died when she was 9, leaving the family in poverty, but also having impressed upon Bernadette strong Republican ideals. Bernadette's mother, Elizabeth Bernadette Devlin, died when Bernadette was 19, and she was subsequently left to juggle the care of her younger siblings with her university studies. It was in 1968, and while studying psychology at Queen's University in Belfast, that Bernadette became involved in the student-led civil rights organisation People's Democracy, an organisation that emerged out of the Northern Irish civil rights movement. The People's Democracy maintained that civil rights for all, but specifically for Catholic Northern Irish people, could only be achieved in a unified socialist Republic of Ireland. The People's Democracy were for free speech and assembly, and the fair allocation of housing and jobs, and against the gerrymandering that saw loyalist officials elected in predominantly Catholic Republican districts, and for the repeal of the Civil Authorities, or the Special Powers Act of 1922, which essentially provided for all such steps and all such orders as may be necessary for preserving the peace and maintaining order. In effect, the Special Powers Act legitimised brutality against and surveillance of Catholics in Northern Ireland, the expropriation of their licensed premises in their land, and their internment without trial. And in fact, the Act anticipates the Bush Doctrine in some ways by forbidding the spread by word of mouth or text of any statements likely to cause disaffection amongst the subjects of His Majesty, as he was then. My granddad also wanted me to point out that the Special Powers Act outlawed the flying of the Irish flag, and so allowed the cunt Ian Paisley to burn those flags down wherever he found them. That's just a joke, because my granddad would never use the word cunt. He said that was too kind a word. Just as an aside, the People's Democracy eventually became a Trotskyist organisation and merged with others to form the Irish section of the reunited Fourth Internationale. For her involvement with the People's Democracy, Bernadette was ultimately excluded from Queen's University. In 1969, Bernadette stood unsuccessfully for a seat in the Northern Irish and British Parliaments, but later in the same year she won a by-election, which at 21 saw her become the youngest woman elected to Westminster, and she remained so until the election of the Scottish National Party candidate Murray Black in 2015. The day before her 22nd birthday, Bernadette swore her oath of allegiance. "I will take my seat and fight for your rights," said Bernadette, challenging the Northern Irish Republican policy of abstentionism. Also in 1969, Bernadette was convicted for incitement to a riot for her involvement in the Battle of the Bogside in County Derry. Simply put, the Battle of the Bogside occurred when residents of the Bogside district, sick and tired of the Protestant marches through their neighbourhood, and sick and tired of the gerrymandering that saw them completely unrepresented at a parliamentary level, and sick and tired of the government's policies that limited the voting rights of predominantly Catholic renters, finally took to the streets. They were fiercely repelled, to say the least, and Bernadette spent approximately 6 months in prison following her conviction for incitement to a riot. And said Bernadette, "I was involved with people in defending the area. They were justified in defending themselves, and I believe I was justified in assisting their defence. If the same circumstances rose again, I would have no problems helping them again." Almost immediately after the Battle of the Bogside, Bernadette undertook a tour of the United States. In New York, she was gifted a set of keys to the city, which she then gifted via the journalist and politician Eamon McCann to the Black Panthers. In 1972, Bernadette witnessed firsthand the atrocities of Bloody Sunday, again in the Bogside district of County Derry. 13 people were killed outright by British soldiers. And I don't know if people here in New Zealand have ever seen a rubber bullet. They're actually fucking massive. I was lucky enough to go to a museum made by a brother of someone who died in Bloody Sunday, and that was pretty weird. Anyway, the day after Bloody Sunday, when in Westminster, the Tory Home Secretary Reginald Morling suggested that British soldiers had fired only in self-defence. Bernadette crossed the floor and literally bitch-slapped a man. So that's hence me calling her bitch-slapping Bernadette. And my granddad still laughs whenever he thinks about it. In 1974, Bernadette helped to establish the Irish Republican Socialist Party, a revolutionary breakaway from Sinn Féin. In 1981, Bernadette survived an assassination attempt in which her and her husband were shot by agents of the loyalist Ulster Defence Force. Bernadette was shot 9 times in her own home in front of her children and while British soldiers were surveilling her house. There is more to say about Bernadette Devlin, but for now let me say that she is still alive and she works in Northern Ireland to improve the treatment of migrant workers. Many of you will know who Bernadette Devlin is, and many of you will have been living in the UK at the time that she was active. I did not select Bernadette Devlin because she is obscure. I selected her because she embodies the very best of student politics, and I recognise and wish to flag that both capitalism and the capitalist tertiary institution have worked very hard to defang students by imposing constraints on their time and finances. I also chose Bernadette for her willingness to get down and dirty in Parliament. This is where it gets to my pencil writing, and so you have to forgive me with reading what I wrote. I don't love Parliament, and nor do I love the hacks that it has to offer, but neither do I love big men who are righteous. I think Bernadette proves that you can, via the bitch slap, that you can enter the master's home without becoming his lackey or yes man. I also admire Bernadette for the way in which she has continued to stand for the inclusion of LGBT people in St. Patrick's Day parades in New York and elsewhere. So she's been very staunch on pride marches in Ireland, which is, nothing to say the least in a highly religious environment, but also elsewhere, where perhaps the worst of Irish sentiment has taken hold. And finally, I chose Bernadette because unlike other Northern Irish Republicans who have become Republican to the extent that they've become nationalist, she has never stopped looking for and challenging the structures of power that are common across colonial territories and nations. So no offence to the martyrs, but I loved most the murals in Belfast that had to do with Palestine and Africa and stuff like that. So that's Bernadette Devlin, the bitch slapper. Okay, let's go back to where I was. Here are questions. I found the questions. So I'm just super proud of these women on stage. They are my friends and my fellow travellers. Please give them all a round of applause. I'm going to open things up for discussion, and I have some questions for Kezia, Angela and Hayley. And once I've asked and I've answered those questions, I'll be happy to take questions from the floor. And I'm also happy to take more reflective, aka longer contributions from the women in attendance. But yeah, so if you guys are ready, I'll be happy to find... You guys have stolen my questions deliberately, haven't you? You totally did. Oh, there they are. More for me for trying to let people have a sneak peek. Okay. So is everyone happy for me to continue and just like open things up? I'm seeing some nods, that seems good. Okay, so thank you so much. You're the best. So let's start here. So whether you're studying or working, or studying and working, can you tell me about it? And also can you tell me about any issues that you encounter in the course of your study or work? And they might be things relating to pay and precarity, working from home, health and safety, workload, or anything else that is true for you. Yeah.
I'm going to open this pin up. So I'm currently working as a med-lab scientist at the DHB. It's quite, union-wise, it's really interesting because there are two different unions. There's the PSA, there's the Public Service Association. There's also the APEX, which is the Medical Laboratory Workers Union. It's a lot of kind of like, there's a lot of, not, I wouldn't say infighting, but kind of like tension between the two unions. The APEX, which I'm a proud member of, are seen as the ones that are like, oh, quite like, you know, they want to fight. We're down to get dirty. And I know that like my union representatives would fucking like die for me. But a lot of the people within my work are just like, oh no, we got to be nice. We got to get in with management, which is, you know, most of the PSA people. So I find that quite interesting. But so recently, you know, the PSA strike has been called off last week. And as I said, a lot of the PSA members are the ones who are just, you know, chill and just want to get on with, you know, life. Don't want to have any like combative arguments with people, with management. But it's been really interesting because, you know, everyone was not really prepared to strike. But, you know, the employment relations, you know, that they called off the strike on Friday. And when that was called off, it was a really interesting time because a lot of people were just like, fuck, this is fucked up. You know, everyone deserves, we need to strike, you know. We need fair pay. Med-lab workers have been so underpaid for so long. We worked, you know, we have a 4-year degree to get into the job and then like a year of internship after that. And kind of seeing, you know, the levels of our pay and, you know, we are required to work weekends, overtime, like we work midnight shifts, it's bullshit, it's a lot of work. And to see those conditions that we have decline over time, over the last like 20 to 30 to 40 years, and everyone else, like, you know, seeing the gains that the nurses have made and all that kind of stuff, it's hard to see. So it's quite cool, you know, it's bullshit that the strike was called off, but also now that everyone has seen that there's so much more solidarity and like, no, we have to fight for this, and it's great. I love it. I love to fight. I'm down to get dirty and I'll fucking die for it.
Why was the strike called off?
We'll save that, Hannah, for when I open up to the floor, okay? That is actually a really great question. I don't know the answer, but we'll
Also follow Canterbury Socialist Society on Twitter to find out, because it was tweeted about at the time. I'm jumping in now because my work is kind of related to Angela's work in that I register healthcare professionals, including medical laboratory workers, and just to back up that the pay for medical laboratory workers is absolutely appalling. Like, yes, the scientists have a 4-year degree, but the technicians and the analytic technicians have a much lower qualification, but are also paid effectively minimum wage a lot of the time. And even the scientists, we have to see proof of employment before they get their first practicing certificate, and so a lot of them will just send us their offer letters that include their salary, and I'm always just like, oh no. It's pretty appalling, and I mean, support for basically any striking workers anytime, but especially that sector. When the strike was called up, I was bummed. It's like, come on guys, come on, go for it. I don't have so much to say about my actual workplace because I'm in one of these freak workplaces that even though it's not actually unionised and I don't think there is a union, I could. I mean, if I thought there was a union I could join, I would have by now. I'm pretty sure there isn't. It's like a 12-person organisation, but we have pretty good conditions. I do work from home all the time, but that's because I asked for it. I persuaded them that I could work from Christchurch even though they're in Wellington, because I couldn't afford a house in Wellington, and I can, just.
Relatable!
Yeah.
That's okay. Let's skip we kind of answered the do you belong to a union? That's fine. Are there any issues that you encounter outside of your study or work? And I'm meaning, that's like a nice way of saying, in your personal life that you feel like are relevant talking about. Or else are there particular issues that interest you at the moment? This was the one that I was expecting this kind of response to. Yeah. We can move on, but
I'm just going to backtrack to the question you skipped and say that I was in a union when I could be in a union when I was studying in the States, and I was the chief steward of the workplace. It was, I can't remember now, something like 1,100 people. So that was fun. We got to negotiate directly with the state of New York, being a state of New York, university. So that was a good time, but a while ago now. I'm just going to skip the next question because I don't know.
I'll say that I'm also a PSA delegate, and the PSA is like, we get shit. So. I mean, be in it if it's your union, but like...
I've been trying to join it for months.
I mean, I will recruit you, but...
Please!
You should be... It's better to be in it than not.
Literally.
But it's not like a thing to be
But only just.
psyched about, whatever. Okay. I think, should we skip the activism? No one wants to answer that, eh?
I was going to say,
I came up
I
with
can
a
actually
weird
answer that one
question.
as well that you was trying to skip.
Well, you can... Well, it's just very hard because it's like, there's like a 66.6% disapproval rate of my questions. And it's really hard.
All I was going to say is that I was also very involved in Food Not Bombs back in the day when I was in uni in the States again, because I was very poor. It was mostly out of necessity, but also there was a very robust Food Not Bombs network where I happened to live, and so there's like the interest in sort of someone who's an activist about like food equity is not like a newfound thing. It's sort of a long-standing thing, and and because the question was about sort of activism and community, it was a real...
I didn't ask it, but...
No, she didn't ask it, but I read it in advance. So. Yeah, you're going to ask you the ones that don't want to answer, so I'm going to go rogue.
Okay, let's ask some serious ones now. So according to Alexandra Calonte, motherhood is not a private affair, but a natural social function of women. From the first day of the existence of the Soviet state, Soviet legislation always emphasized the view that women have two primary tasks in the new society: to be active citizens of the state and at the same time not to neglect motherhood. Have you all experienced any pressure either to have or not have children?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely still pressure on women to have children. I mean, if I still had a relationship with my mother, I assume I would still be getting that pressure from her, which is ridiculous. She has 7 kids. There are enough grandkids coming out. She does not need me to have children to her. But yes, absolutely, yes.
I absolutely do. Coming from, my family are religious, like super religious, and I think ever since I was probably, born, my mum was just like, as soon as you're 18, you're going to get married and have kids. Like, it's going to be a thing. That's your life. You're going to get married when you're probably, 14? Yes, you'll be 14, and then when you turn 18, you'll have children. Obviously, that does not happen. I'm now 30. Biggest disappointment to my family. But like that aside, constantly getting asked by workmates, everything's just like, when are you having kids? When are you having kids? How long do you plan on being in this career for? It's just like, oh fuck, like it's a lot. It's a lot of pressure. I want to do my job and live my life, and not, please don't ask me these questions because it's got nothing to do with you. Yeah, no, it's rough.
I definitely noticed more of the questions when I was younger. I think I did a good job of just being single for a really long time through my late 20s, early 30s, just for the most part of my adult life. If you just be single, people let up a little bit. And then also with age, I've noticed a massive tapering off. Rapidly heading into my late 30s, I am not really asked that anymore, and it's fantastic. So, just go grey and people will leave you alone.
But Haley, when are you gonna have babies?
I'll get dogs.
Okay, yeah.
Shout out to my mother-in-law for asking me what I would name my kids after I literally just told her that I didn't want to have any.
I mean,
dogs.
How are you? But I also, if I have enough to drink, I'll say to Sam, like, should our kid be called Cuchulainn? Because he was like Irish, mythological hero.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, Cu for short. But it is a thing, and I know that when I was in my young years, I spent a lot of time becoming radicalised through reproductive rights and through, abortion is now, legalised, but it hasn't been for a long time for most of my life. And having to access that was like a real, political thing. But yeah, certainly as you get older now, I'm like, it'd be great if I could afford to have children. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's fine.
So many people are just like, don't work in your career for too long. Like the time is ticking.
So lose. Be a career lady, have nothing.
Old.
Have it all, have nothing. That's the slogan of capitalism today for women. Anyway, for Olga Mera, recreation and specifically sport is key to a person's mental and physical well-being. What do you do for your own mental and physical well-being? Or what prevents you from recreating?
Olga. Fantastic woman. Badass menace. For me, I like to hit the gym. Very into the old powerlifting. But I don't know, I just feel like kind of recreation, having the ability to have time, I think, to be able to do those kind of things, I think is really important. It's really nice to have, you have a shit day at work, blow it out at the gym, it's great. But, at the same time, work can be really demanding and awful, and a lot of the time you don't have time to do that, which is challenging.
Dogs need walking, so that's like a baseline minimum for me. Yeah. And then, doing a bit of yoga, got back into swimming. But yeah, same thing. It's always time. It's like, well, I could have another half hour of sleep, or I could get up and have time to do some yoga, or I can go for a swim this evening. But also, I've got friends I want to catch up with. So, am I socialising, or am I doing a bit of exercise? We'll go sort of one way from the other, so I don't become too insular or just never actually move.
Or too buff.
I'll never get too buff. I don't think it's possible.
I mean, work is, 8 to 5, it's supposed to be, 8 hours of your day, but fuck, it exhausts you, and it just takes up every other hour of your day because you're fucking tired, and yeah, it's hard.
I live in a 4-story apartment. Those stairs are my exercise. My bedroom is on the top floor. I think I'm good with them.
Yeah.
No, I do walk to work and to uni, and it's only like a 30-minute walk for both of those, but that is my daily, trying to get exercise into the day without taking up too much time.
I have 1 kg weights, which I may as well have cans. But what I like to do is do 20 of these, 20 of these, 20 of these, and then I do some sort of grunting on the floor. And I do that 3 times, and that's circuit training.
I wanted to join you on your series.
It's very much the Sionainn program.
Should we do a demo?
Yeah.
It's
Okay,
from
so
Monroe,
look, we got 3 to go. We got 3 to go. On International Women's Day 2022, aka yesterday, the New Zealand Commerce Commission published its market study into the retail grocery sector, concluding that competition is not working well for consumers in the retail grocery sector, and recommending that a suite of changes needs to be instituted to increase competition and help improve the price, quality and range of groceries available to New Zealanders. So without even mentioning inflation, it's fair to say that the issues that Jack Monroe identifies in the UK are also issues here in New Zealand. So I'm wondering, have you all sort of noticed price increases on basic consumer items, and or do you agree that these increases disproportionately affect women? It's a hard question at this time.
I think the changes are noticeable. I mean, the random picture that I took of a single $6.50 head of iceberg lettuce a few weeks ago, I mean, like, who even wants iceberg lettuce even when it's $1, let alone $6.50? It's mental. I think someone was ranting the other day about a $7.50 cauliflower. I didn't see that one, but yeah, I think there've been enough reports of prices going up. I mean, having a duopoly is not good, obviously. When I lived in Wellington, I used to do all my groceries just at the local farmers market. I'd go down with $20 and get a bunch of fruit and vegetables. It'd be more than enough for the week, supplemented by some dirt cheap rice or whatever and some seasoning. But here we don't have. I don't think. If anyone knows of any farmers markets,
my sister says the same. She's recently moved to Christchurch from Wellington, and she's like, where can I get produce?
Yeah, if anyone's got any leads on that, let us know. Let everyone know. But yeah, it just does seem to be creeping up. I'm not sure about disproportionately. I think it's probably disproportionately affecting poor people. Yeah, anyone living paycheck to paycheck who's getting PAYE going out of the paycheck and then GST going out of everything they spend, and there's nothing to set aside. It's just the same as always. They were talking about tax cuts as well, right? And there was just kind of murmuring going around of there should be tax cuts to the lowest income. Anyone below certainly below the living wage, I don't think should pay a cent of tax. They're below the living wage. Don't take tax on top of it.
I've seen some horrendous stuff about, actually what we should do is as minimum wage increases, that really means that we should increase the tax bracket, but in a horrendous way, I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, I think absolutely tax cuts for low-income people and ramp it up for high-income people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, disproportionately affecting poor people, not necessarily women.
Yeah, nice.
Although pay gap probably means women are disproportionately represented in that.
Okay, so Bernadette Devlin challenged the Irish Republican policy of abstentionism. What do you think about parliamentary politics, and specifically ahead of the 2023 or 2024, would have to be in January, New Zealand general election?
I just have no faith at all in party politics. I think it's crock of shit, and it's always just the same, I guess. Labour's in with a full caucus, full everything. Nothing's, I guess COVID's been a thing, but just nothing's fucking come through. I just have no hope for it. I don't care for it at all.
Yeah, I voted in every election that I could, including when I was living overseas, going to the effort of doing the whole from overseas voting. But the next one, if things are much as they are now, I can't see who I would actually muster the energy to vote for, even if it's a few minutes meander from my home, because there's just no one sufficiently inspiring for me right now to bother. There's like the lesser evil, but it's, I don't know, at some point it's not persuasive enough. The more evil, I don't know. It's pretty grim. I'm pessimistic right now. Someone do something to encourage me to vote, please.
I'll buy you a cookie.
Don't worry.
Not enough.
You might get Angela.
I'll buy you a cookie. Alright, 2 cookies.
I think we're at the point now where we're sort of just like, yeah, time for a break. So what I want to say is thank you so much to Kezia, Angela, and Hayley. We may reconvene or we may not. We'll see how we feel. But just take it for now that this is the moment where you should like really thank these women for speaking to you. But yeah, thank you so much for coming, and I hope you've enjoyed it.